The most powerful line in cinema history might be the one that was never spoken. And you felt it, in a room where someone said nothing and somehow said everything. That's not charisma. That's not mystery. That's a weapon. And it can be learned. We live in an era of noise. Every platform rewards speed. Every algorithm rewards volume. Every social interaction punishes the pause. We have collectively trained ourselves to fill silence as if it were a wound that needs covering. And in doing so, we have handed an extraordinary amount of power to anyone disciplined enough not to. Johann Liebert rarely raises his voice. In a show full of screaming, full of chaos, full of characters unraveling under pressure, he whispers. And the camera always moves toward him, not because of what he says, because of what he doesn't. There is something in the human nervous system that reads stillness, particularly stillness in a situation that demands reaction, as dominance. We evolved in environments where only apex predators were calm when everything else was afraid. Silence in a charged context reads as power. Anton Chigurh asks a coin toss question to a gas station clerk in No Country for Old Men. The scene lasts 4 minutes. He says almost nothing. He moves barely at all. And it is one of the most terrifying 4 minutes ever put on film. Not because of what Chigurh says, but because of the enormous, invisible pressure of what he withholds. The sense that behind the stillness is something total and irreversible. Psychologists who study interrogation techniques note that strategic silence forces the other person to fill the gap. And what people say when they're filling silence, that's where the truth lives. Light Yagami understands this in a completely different way. He uses information asymmetry, knowing more than the person across from him, to create the appearance of calm. When Elle looks at him and says, "I think you might be Kira," Light doesn't panic. He smiles, because he's already 3 conversations ahead. And that smile, that silence where fear should be, is what makes Elle's blood run cold. The most unnerving thing you can do to someone who expects your vulnerability is to show them none. There is a scene in Peaky Blinders where Tommy Shelby sits across a table from men who want him dead. He doesn't threaten them. He doesn't raise his voice. He looks at them with an expression that contains exactly one thing: the absolute certainty that this conversation has already ended in his favor. And the camera holds on their faces as they realize they're not negotiating with him. They're watching him decide. This is what researchers at Stanford's negotiation lab call the expectation gap effect. When someone behaves with less anxiety than the situation appears to warrant, observers automatically attribute the discrepancy to hidden resources, to knowledge, to preparation, to power the other person doesn't know about yet. Silence in a high-stakes context makes the other person's imagination do your work for you. And imagination always constructs something more terrifying than reality. Lelouch v. Britannia builds entire psychological campaigns on this principle. He never lets anyone see him think. The strategic mind, the calculation, the doubt, the course correction is invisible. What people see is the result, the decision, the move already made. Opponents aren't just defeated, they're made to feel that defeat was always the only possible outcome. That is not intelligence. That is the performance of inevitability. And it is perhaps the most devastating psychological weapon in the arsenal. Gendo Ikari barely speaks to his son across the entire run of Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is not negligence depicted as a character flaw. This is a man who has weaponized emotional withholding so completely that his son will pilot a monstrous machine, destroy his own psyche, and risk annihilation, all for the faintest possibility of parental acknowledgement. Silence used this way isn't passive. It is the most aggressive form of control. The person waiting for the response becomes controllable in direct proportion to how badly they need it. We need to pause here, because this territory is uncomfortable. Because most of us have been on both sides of this dynamic. We have been the person withholding because we were afraid or because we learned that silence kept us safe. And we have been the person waiting for the word, the look, the gesture that would confirm we were enough. The great characters who master silence are not admirable because they're cold. They're fascinating because they reveal a truth about need. Need is the engine of manipulation, and silence, strategic, controlled, precise, is what switches off your own need long enough to let the other person's need do the work. Michael Corleone barely speaks in the first Godfather. He watches, he listens, he takes everything in. And then, in the restaurant scene, he executes two men with a clarity that terrifies precisely because there is no hesitation. No noise before the action, just silence, and then consequence. The cinematography does something extraordinary here. The noise of the city outside gets louder and louder in the moments before the shooting. The train, the traffic, everything escalates except Michael. He gets quieter as the world gets louder. And that inverse relationship between external pressure and internal stillness is, in cinema and in life, one of the most reliable signals of genuine power. Here is what no one tells you about the powerful silence of these characters. It costs something. Johann Liebert's stillness is built on an emptiness so profound it consumed everything human in him. Gendo Ikari's withholding destroyed his son. Michael Corleone's composure came at the price of every relationship that mattered. Silence is only a weapon when it replaces something. And what it replaces is usually warmth. The characters we can't look away from are not the ones who are silent because they feel nothing. They are the ones who are silent because they have decided that what they feel is no one else's business. And in a world that demands emotional transparency, that demands constant legibility, a person who refuses to be read is not closed off. They are, in the most technical sense, free. The person who controls what they show you controls what you believe about them. And the person who controls what you believe controls you.